This is Snooker, a widely loved variant of billiards in the United Kingdom. On May 5, 1980, the Snooker Championship Final drew an audience of every fifth person in the nation. Out of the blue, the broadcast was interrupted, revealing a shocking scene. Individuals in black masks stormed a historic building in London. In the world that existed before September 11, 2001, May 5th was an eventful day of the 80s. A group of militants seized the embassy building in London, taking approximately 20 hostages. Millions witnessed these dramatic events unfold in real time. The takeover on May 5th marked the gripping conclusion to a 6-day thriller saga, with armed militants as the primary antagonists, appearing willing to go to any extent. If their demands were not met, the hostages faced dire consequences. The dilemma was that British authorities were unwilling to negotiate under any circumstances, and law enforcement had no prior experience with intricate hostage rescue operations. In this tense scenario were 26 hostages, comprising men and women of diverse ages and backgrounds. They communicated in various languages and held different professions and life perspectives. However, their shared wish for survival brought them together. Among the millions monitoring the 6-day standoff, no one could foresee how it would conclude. Every second, every choice, and every detail held the potential to dramatically alter the course of events. How did the militants manage to take control of a diplomatic building in the heart of Britain? What were their motives? What unfolded both inside and outside the seized building? And ultimately, how did this unprecedented rescue operation reach its conclusion? This is the tale of the embassy takeover in London that left the world in shock. Music, 6 days, 3:30 p.m. That is how long the embassy siege lasted in 1980. Thanks to the attention it garnered as a media sensation at the time, we can now meticulously reconstruct each of the 6 days, in some instances, down to the minute. This narrative serves as a thrilling drama, infused with psychological tension. It tested everyone involved: police, kidnappers, journalists, politicians, and foremost, the hostages. Each individual reacted differently when faced with these unparalleled conditions, which is entirely understandable. No one truly knows how they will act in a life-threatening situation until they are confronted by one. The Iranian embassy in London sits almost at the city's center, in a tranquil and serene area. A beautiful park featuring a palace is located nearby. The diplomatic building is under the watch of Constable Trevor Locke, a 41-year-old officer who is slightly overweight and affable, resembling the stereotypical policeman often depicted in jokes by assisting elderly ladies across the street and rescuing cats from trees. Security duties at the embassy were exceedingly dull and routine, but Trevor Locke appreciated that predictability. Just minutes before, the glass door of the building swung open and Abbas Pahlavi, the doorman, stepped out. He offered Locke a cup of piping hot, freshly brewed coffee. Though accepting gifts while on duty is prohibited for police officers, a light drizzle was falling outside, and the day seemed set to be uneventful, so the guard accepted the offer. Music. Trevor Locke notices a young man approaching the embassy doors and thinks, "Here comes another Iranian student for a visa." The young man is clutching a dark object. Trevor quickly realizes that it's a submachine gun just as gunfire erupts. The cup of coffee slips from his hand, and the glass door shatters upon being struck by a bullet. Reeling backward, the police officer feels blood streaming into his eyes. Several armed intruders pour into the building, shouting in Arabic and firing shots into the air. Trevor Locke manages to hit the emergency button on his radio. A moment later, one of the militants wrenches the device from the officer's jacket and commands him in English to stand against the wall. The police officer discovers he is uninjured and that the blood on his face is from shards of broken glass. At the moment, the militants stormed the building. Just over 30 individuals were inside. Roughly half of them were employees of the Iranian diplomatic service, while the other half consisted of representatives from various countries visiting the embassy for visa issues, permits, and other bureaucratic matters. Some visitors, startled by the gunfire, began leaping out of the windows to escape. However, the head of the Iranian diplomatic mission in the UK, Gholam Afrouzi, is less fortunate. He jumps from his office at a height of 6 meters, but lands awkwardly. The ambassador fractures several ribs and suffers a concussion, remaining motionless on the embassy's back lawn until the militants haul him back inside. At this point, there are 26 hostages in the captured building. They are organized into groups, one for women, another for Iranian men, and a third for all other men, including representatives from Britain, Syria, and Pakistan. The hostages are subjected to searches. Somehow, the militants fail to notice a small revolver tucked into Trevor Locke's belt underneath several layers of his police uniform. The constable is torn between seeing this as an opportunity or a peril to his life. On one hand, he could use the revolver at a crucial moment. On the other, if the weapon is found, Trevor could be facing death. Approximately 20 minutes after the first shot rang out, the police realize they are confronting an unprecedented crisis. The Iranian embassy has been taken over and hostages are inside. But how many? Who are these individuals? And most critically, what are the militants' intentions and what lengths are they willing to go to? The answers remain unclear. Numerous police officers are gathering around the Iranian embassy building. Their operations are overseen by a high-ranking officer from Scotland Yard, Albert Dillo. His primary goal is to establish communication with the militants and find out their demands. The negotiator approaches the embassy doors and loudly proclaims that he is a police representative eager to engage in dialogue. Shortly thereafter, a militant's face appears at the window, partly concealed by a scarf. He hands a piece of paper to the negotiator. The message is written in English. In it, the captors express their apologies for the situation and explain that their actions are a necessary measure. They declare themselves as representatives of the so-called Arabistan, a small area in Iran inhabited by an Arab minority. The terrorists claim that the current authorities are persecuting their people and that their takeover of the embassy is a method to exert pressure on the Iranian leadership. They outline 3 primary demands: the release of the 91st representative of the Arab minority currently imprisoned in Iran, recognition of the full rights of Arabs by the state's authorities, and for Britain to provide a plane to evacuate the militants and hostages out of the country. If their terms are not fulfilled, the terrorists threaten to kill the hostages and detonate the building. After checking the hostages, the militants remove the scarves, allowing their faces to be seen at last. They are 6 young Arab men, none appearing to be over 30, which is indeed accurate. The leader of the terrorists is a man named Salim, which is his alias. His real name is Tafiq Ibrahim Ali Rashidi. His life story is rather unconventional for a terrorist. The narrative of his life provides insight into the complex motivations of this group of militants, where geopolitics, national concerns, personal vendettas, and a hint of naivety are all intertwined. A year prior to the embassy's seizure in 1979, an event unfolded in the Middle East that some historians regard as one of the most pivotal occurrences of the 20th century, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. This event is frequently illustrated online with before and after photographs showing women without hijabs and in short skirts before the revolution, contrasting sharply with the opposite scenario afterward. While this representation holds some truth, the actual reality was far more intricate. The final monarch of Iran, Mohammad Pahlavi, was a favored despot among Western leaders in the Middle East, a modern leader who welcomed cooperation and amassed wealth from oil revenues. Simultaneously, Pahlavi was a ruthless authoritarian who suppressed dissent and political opposition. In a nation where Persians constituted the majority, Arabs were a minority, residing primarily in the oil-rich southwestern regions of Iran. Despite this wealth, they lived under harsher conditions and enjoyed fewer rights and opportunities than their Persian counterparts. Tafiq al-Rashidi was fortunate to be born into a relatively affluent family among Iranian Arabs, allowing him to attend a prestigious institute in Tehran. He was fluent in 4 languages and, like many students, had a keen interest in politics. Initially, he took part in protests against monarch Pahlavi. However, after his overthrow, radical anti-Western theocrats, led by Sayyid Ali Khamenei, came to power in Iran. The Arab community in Iran hoped that the new government would grant some degree of autonomy to the region they referred to as Arabistan in the southwest of the country, just as had been promised. Khamenei had no intentions of fulfilling such promises and instead increased his control over the region. The demonstrations by the Arabs were now being brutally suppressed by the new authorities, with the number of protesters killed sometimes reaching several hundred. Tafiq's brother was among those murdered by the new regime, serving as a catalyst for Tafiq's transformation. The intelligent, educated young man became a resistance fighter, undergoing training at a base in Iraq. The country's leader, Saddam Hussein, expressed sympathy for the Arabs, but also aimed to destabilize his rival Iran, leading him to assist in training militants and supplying them with weapons. Using fake passports, Tafiq and 5 accomplices journeyed to London, where they launched their operation on April 30th. Sim Harris and Chris Kremer, both employees of the BBC, arrived at the Iranian embassy to request visas. Now, they find themselves sitting on the floor of one of the offices, threatened by the barrels of automatic rifles. As the initial shock subsides, Sim Harris observes an intriguing detail. The militants are dressed in new, fashionable attire. Their jeans and sneakers appear to have been purchased just a few hours earlier from an upscale London store, and this assumption is not far from the truth. The day prior, the terrorists had enjoyed a shopping spree, lavishly spending the funds provided by their Iraqi organizers. None of them intended to sacrifice their lives. Half of the group, including their leader Tafiq, were well-educated individuals who had lost family members in the fight against Khamenei's regime. The militants genuinely believed their cause was noble and expected that Britain and Iran would concede to their demands within a day. They assumed they would not have to kill anyone and anticipated departing the country as heroes. This naive plan was not entirely unfounded. In the 70s, there were several instances of hostage-taking in Western countries that concluded in similar ways, with authorities conceding to the terrorists. However, the militants who overtook the embassy in London overlooked the fact that Margaret Thatcher was the sitting prime minister. Having assumed office a year earlier, she called for an emergency meeting to address the crisis at the Iranian embassy. Although Thatcher had not yet earned the nickname the Iron Lady, her response to the unfolding situation plainly illustrated why she would eventually come to deserve it. The Prime Minister's stance is unwavering and resolute. The hostages must be released peacefully if feasible, and ideally, all of them. However, there is no possibility of allowing the militants to leave British soil. They have committed a crime in the country, and therefore they must be confronted on that very territory. End of discussion. Officer Dillo from Scotland Yard finds himself in a challenging predicament. With Thatcher's directives in mind, he has little room for negotiation. The captor's demands are unrealistic, and the police lack the experience and resources for a full-scale assault, so Dillo opts to buy time. The police negotiator with the militants presents himself only as a liaison. Ostensibly, he claims he does not make decisions and must communicate everything to his superiors. This psychological tactic effectively serves as a stalling method, attributing all delays to that hypothetical leadership. The Iranian embassy is situated in a building that is closely flanked by several others. People are being evacuated from the area, while armed police and dogs secure the perimeter. Snipers are positioned on the rooftops of the nearby buildings. Dillo determines that the assault will commence regardless of the conditions, should the terrorists be found to have killed 2 hostages. Another pressing concern at that moment is that the police still do not know the exact number of hostages or their identities. Meanwhile, tension inside the embassy continues to escalate. Trevor Locke realizes he needs to use the bathroom. However, the male hostages are allowed this under the watchful eyes of militants with the door wide open. The officer senses that as soon as he pulls down his pants, his gun will likely fall out. Given that the captors have threatened to kill the hostages if their demands are not met, predicting their reaction to concealed weapons is challenging. As a result, Locke resolves to nearly entirely abstain from food and water, hoping to endure for as long as possible. At this moment, BBC producer Chris Kremer still believes everything will conclude soon and the hostages will be released. However, as a precaution, he writes a farewell note to his parents and slips it into his pocket. The Iranian ambassador Afrus narrowly survived an unsuccessful leap from the window. However, he is suffering from a few broken ribs and a mild concussion, leaving him in a semi-conscious state as he sits on the floor. Beside him is Sayed Lassani, officially the assistant to the press attaché of the Iranian embassy. but in reality, he is a spy. His primary role was to monitor dissidents who had escaped Iran and to gather intelligence on Western countries' intentions concerning Iran. Afraus, Lavasani, and several other hostages recently commenced their roles at the diplomatic mission in the UK, shortly after the Islamic Revolution. They are passionate supporters of the current regime and Ayatollah Khamenei. This fact is vital for understanding the dynamics of relationships within the embassy. Approximately 30 individuals are present: random visitors, technical staff who began working at the embassy long before the Islamic Revolution and hold varying opinions about it, loyal supporters of Ayatollah Khamenei who have been recently appointed, and finally, militants, who are staunch adversaries of the present Iranian government. All these individuals, with their completely different values, find themselves in a highly tense atmosphere within a confined space. It's the perfect embodiment of Chekhov's gun, and as a spoiler, it will inevitably go off later. Despite the unprecedented nature of the situation and the intense psychological strain, most of the hostages managed to remain calm throughout the first day, partially thanks to the behavior of the militants. They act quite courteously, especially toward women and non-Iranian men. The terrorists apologize for any inconvenience, provide the hostages with food found in the embassy, and offer basic medications if necessary. The situation is particularly challenging for one of the young female staff members at the embassy. She constantly cries and occasionally loses consciousness. Initially, the hostages request that the police send a doctor, but they decline, fearing he could become another hostage. The female staff members inform the militants that their colleague is unwell due to pregnancy, which is not true, but serves to secure the desired outcome. Later in the evening, the terrorists release the hostage. Much to the police's dismay, she is so shaken that she cannot recall what occurred and is unable to provide any useful information about the militants, their numbers, weapons, plans, or anything else. In addition to political disagreements, the individuals in the embassy are also hindered by a language barrier. The militants' mother tongue is Arabic, the Iranians speak Farsi, and the British communicate in English. Some present know multiple languages, though none are fluent. In this context, one of the most valuable hostages becomes Mustafa Karkuti, a journalist of Syrian-British descent who found himself in the embassy building due to a visa issue. Karkuti acts as a crucial link between the militants, the hostages, and the authorities, thanks to his proficiency in Arabic and English. It is Karkuti who, under the threat of a gun, helps the terrorists communicate with the BBC editorial office. The hostages communicate their demands and the purpose of the takeover to journalists. This information is then conveyed to the Iranian foreign minister by Ambassador Afrus, who calls directly from the embassy using a special phone line. He also mentions that the terrorists have threatened to kill the hostages if their demands are not met. The reaction from the head of Iran's foreign ministry is predictable and unequivocal. He asserts that this is all part of a planned CIA operation, which is false, and implicates Iraq, which is true. The minister further states that Iran has no intention of negotiating with the terrorists, much less meeting their demands. They regard any hostages killed as true martyrs who sacrificed their lives for the Islamic Revolution. For the terrorists, although the call doesn't yield results, it brings little disappointment as they genuinely believe that, under media pressure, the British authorities will negotiate with the Iranian government to fulfill their demands before the 24-hour ultimatum expires. The following day is anticipated to be pivotal. Late in the evening, the terrorists instruct the hostages to go to sleep. Under the cover of darkness, 2 vans arrive at one of the buildings next to the embassy. From there, around 20 men in jeans and caps, carrying large bags, emerge. They could easily be mistaken for a group of tourists, if not for the late hour. These men are members of a covert military unit known as the Special Air Service, abbreviated as SAS. The deadline for the Militants' ultimatum is set to expire at noon on Thursday. Prime Minister Thatcher's stance remains resolute. There can be no question of permitting the militants to leave the country even if they release the hostages. In contrast, the militants have no intention of releasing anyone. Instead, they threaten to kill the hostages if their demands are not satisfied. The terrorists emphasize this point in an interview with BBC journalists that they initiate on Thursday morning. For the militants, obtaining extensive media coverage of their actions is a primary goal. It serves as a means to attract widespread attention to the regional issue, which few outside of Iran have acknowledged. For Albert Delu, who manages police operations around the embassy, the militants' ability to access phones within the building poses a challenge. Ideally, law enforcement should control all information coming in and out of the building. If the police represent the sole communication channel for the militants with the outside world, it will facilitate much more effective negotiations. Consequently, Delu decides to cut all telephone lines to the embassy, completely disrupting the militants' communication. Naturally, the terrorists are made aware that there is an issue with communications, leading the negotiators to pass a working phone through the window as a replacement. However, this phone can only connect to the police. Furthermore, the new phone comes with a short cord, requiring the terrorists to keep it on the first floor. As a result, some militants will be positioned near the device on the first floor. This detail is crucial for planning the assault. Using the new phone, the terrorists notify the police that they will release another hostage, BBC producer Chris Kremer. Throughout the night, he suffered from severe abdominal pain and diarrhea, and since then, he has remained on the floor, giving the impression of a dying man. He was given pills available to the militants, but they provided no relief. Ultimately, 2 hostages help carry the semi-conscious Kremer out of the building and leave him on the sidewalk, where police collect him. In the ambulance, it becomes evident that the BBC producer is unwell, but his condition is far from critical. Throughout the previous night, he had been actively feigning his dying state. Recognizing that the previous hostage was released for health reasons, Kremer understood that this was his opportunity. He anticipated a long life ahead of him, but he would always grapple with guilt over escaping the building alive through deceit. However, due to Kremer's relatively good health, he provides the police with a wealth of information about events unfolding inside the building immediately after his release. He details how many hostages are present and their conditions, mentions there are 6 militants, describes them and their locations within the building, outlines the weapons they possess, and notes they have grenades, along with remarks about more serious explosives that Kremer did not personally see. He also notes that the guard Trevor Locke inside possesses a hidden revolver. Thursday morning marks the point at which the hostage situation at the embassy in London escalates into a global news story. British and international journalists begin to flock to the scene. The last time such a significant number of press members assembled was 30 years earlier during the coronation of Elizabeth II. Some media representatives arrive in trucks brimming with the latest equipment, while others erect small structures for filming from better positions. Some negotiate with residents of nearby homes to capture the events from their windows. The hostage situation at the Iranian embassy evolves into one of the earliest media sensations unfolding in real time on television. There are just 13 minutes remaining until the deadline set by the militants. The police negotiator informs the captors that efforts to restore the telephone lines are still in progress, but additional time is needed. In return, he offers to inquire with his superiors about the possibility of issuing a press release that includes the terrorists' statements and demands for the global media. Tafiq agrees and extends the ultimatum by 2 hours. This represents a small victory for the police. Just a day prior, the leader of the militants seemed steadfast in his resolve to carry out threats. Yet, unexpectedly, he eases his stance. Although this is far from a complete victory for the police, it undeniably marks progress. The BBC sound engineer, along with hostage Sim Harris, began documenting the events inside the embassy in his notebook almost from the very onset of the takeover. His diary will survive despite the extensive destruction of the building and will offer valuable insights into the takeover from the perspective of the hostages. Thus, at 12:30, Harris records one of the first confrontations between the militants and Iraqi supporters of Ayatollah Khamenei. First and foremost, there is Ambassador Afrus, who feels significantly better on the second day, alongside his press attaché, who is also the Iranian spy Lavasani. The leader of the militants, Tafiq, claims that Khamenei has deceived the Arabs of Iran by not granting them the promised autonomy and rights. Naturally, these statements spark an angry backlash from supporters of the current Iranian regime. "The Imam does not lie," Lavasani exclaims in response. Tafiq and another militant named Yesim retort that they are prepared to die for the freedom of Arabistan. These statements clearly displease most of the hostages, who include embassy technical staff and visitors caught in the situation. They are certainly not willing to die for either side in the conflict. Another deadline for the ultimatum has lapsed. Tafiq calls the authorities and announces that he is extending the deadline to 4:30 p.m. By that time, they will carry out their threats and the police will bear the responsibility. Soon, he calls again and insists that 25 hamburgers be delivered within 5 minutes. Officer Dilu cannot help but observe that the situation is improving. The militants keep pushing back the deadlines of the ultimatum. They have already released 2 hostages, and now they are requesting food delivery. After 5 minutes, the negotiator brings a tray of fast food to the embassy doors. It is crucial for the police that everyone inside the embassy is fed, including both the hostages and the captors, as hungry individuals tend not to be very open to negotiation. The positive effects of simple carbohydrates quickly become evident. At 4:45 p.m., the militants once again push back the ultimatum deadline, now set for 7:00 p.m. As is customary, they emphasize that hostages will be killed if their conditions are not met. However, the most intriguing aspect is their new demands. Among these is a plane at Heathrow Airport that will transport the militants and the Iranian hostages to a Middle Eastern country. The British will be released at the airport. To supervise the process, the terrorists insist on the presence of the ambassadors from Iraq, Algeria, and Jordan. A bus with covered windows must be brought to the embassy building to transport the terrorists and hostages to the airport. This indicates that the demand for the release of 90 Arab prisoners from Iranian jails has been rescinded. According to rumors, some of these prisoners were hurriedly executed right after the embassy takeover. Constable Trevor Locke is the only one who has scarcely touched the delivered burgers, restricting himself to just a few fries. He keeps his revolver concealed. Locke approaches Sim Harris and quietly comments that, in his view, the militants are unlikely to be allowed to leave the country. Contrarily, the leader of the terrorists, Tafiq, is confident that they will. At that moment, he is certainly unaware that under Thatcher's orders, the militants will not be going anywhere, even if it requires prolonging negotiations for an extended period. The issue lies in the fact that while the Prime Minister's patience may seem boundless, the captor's patience is definitely limited. Closer to 7 p.m., as it becomes evident that the captor's demands have once again gone unmet, and furious Tafiq hurls the phone supplied by the police out of the window, by the evening of the second day, the psychological dynamics inside the embassy begin to change noticeably. The rapport between the militants and the hostages improves considerably, particularly with the majority of hostages who are not fervent supporters of Al-Khamenei. Tafiq frequently consults with journalist Karkuti or police officer Locke. He seeks help when something needs to be translated into English, or assesses how likely it is that the police will fulfill the militants' demands. The female hostages express sympathy for the captor named Fawzi, who is the most courteous of all the militants, consistently trying to assist the girls whenever they need anything. Some hostages gradually start to question, why is the police stalling? Why haven't they provided the militants with a bus or a plane? Yes, the captors may be bad, but their demands have been clear and understandable from the start, in stark contrast to the police's conduct, which appears to involve some complex and inscrutable game and deception. At night, several members of the SAS Secret Service ascend to the roof of the Iranian embassy building to conduct area reconnaissance. Earlier that day, SAS leadership had been formulating Operation Nimrod in the basement of a nearby building. The military had several assault options. One plan suggested freeing the hostages from the bus en route to the airport, at the airport itself, or even immediately after being loaded at the embassy. The second option focused on storming the building. There were variations within this approach as well. One involved a direct hard entry through windows and doors, while another proposed lowering SAS personnel down ropes from the roof. According to one of the unit leaders, a rescue operation rarely unfolds as intended due to the opposing side having their own strategies. The SAS assessments revealed that different assault options offered various, success probabilities. The lowest was 5%, while the highest reached 40%. These aren't particularly impressive figures. Additionally, the impending assault poses significant risks for another reason. The SAS is an elite unit created during World War II, and for the past 10 years, they have been actively involved in counter-terrorism efforts. Despite this, every hostage situation in the history of the SAS had concluded before their involvement. This indicates that they meticulously planned assaults that never actually materialized. Consequently, the operation at the Iranian embassy could become their first true mission. Sim Harris noticed in the night that several militants were washing their underwear, and he viewed this as a positive sign. It seems unlikely that individuals preoccupied with the cleanliness of their undergarments are anticipating their demise. A few minutes later, Harris's demeanor shifts dramatically. Tafiq informs the Iranians that the militants plan to execute one of them. According to the leader, he intends to teach the police a lesson. The terrorist allows the Iranians to choose their own victim, giving them 40 minutes to make a decision. Trevor Locke feels the weight of the revolver at his waist. Will he be able to use it when the moment comes? This question delves more into moral considerations than technical ones. By the third day of the embassy takeover, it is clear that many hostages are exhibiting symptoms of a well-known phenomenon. 7 years earlier, criminals had seized a bank building in the capital of Sweden, taking several employees hostage. The crisis unfolded over 6 days until the police assaulted the building, prompting the captors to surrender. However, during their time with the criminals, something unusual happened. The hostages began to feel sympathy for their captors. Reports suggest that one woman even developed romantic feelings for one of the criminals. This phenomenon has since been termed Stockholm Syndrome. The 40-minute ultimatum has elapsed. During this time, one of the Iranian hostages suffered a heart attack and lay on the floor in a semi-conscious state. However, the militants have yet to fulfill their threat to kill. A BBC correspondent and negotiator approached the embassy window. The militants insisted on having a journalist present, as they have now added another demand: broadcasting their statement on BBC Air. These negotiations mark a significant turning point. Tafiq, the leader of the terrorists, hides behind a curtain, while the faces of Harris's and Karkuti's hostages peer out from the window. Furthermore, the victims are not merely conveying the militant statements and demands. They are actively calling for their fulfillment. The hostages truly do not understand why the authorities are hesitating and failing to take action. Researchers studying Stockholm Syndrome attribute it to a shift in the psychology of the hostages. They start to identify with their captors, perceiving the police outside as adversaries. The authorities delay, fail to meet demands, and offer vague responses. Over time, the hostages come to realize that their rescue largely hinges on the terrorists. As a result, they begin to view them as protectors. Simultaneously, the militants undergo a situation reminiscent of Stockholm Syndrome, developing a certain attachment to the hostages. Later on, this phenomenon will be termed Lima Syndrome, named after the hostage-taking incident that occurred in the capital of Peru. This partially elucidates why the militants have not yet acted on their threats of murder. At least, not yet. 20 minutes have elapsed since the police provided the militants with a new phone in exchange for the one discarded by Tafiq. This device allows communication solely with the police, and it's equipped with a bug that enables law enforcement to listen in on conversations within several meters of the vicinity. Trevor Locke and Sim Harris receive a call from the leader of the Militants. In one of the embassy offices, Tafiq stands against the wall, listening intently. A creaking noise emerges from within. The militant asserts that, in his view, the police are gearing up for an assault. Trevor Locke knocks on the wall multiple times, prompting the noise to cease. "The building is very old. It could be mice," he remarks. However, Ion and Sim Harris recognize that this isn't a very convincing lie. The source of the sound was most likely a drill. Tafiq sends Locke to inquire with the Negotiator if the police are truly preparing for an assault. The representative from the authorities responds in the negative, believing this to be the absolute truth. Unbeknownst to the negotiators, the police and MI5 Secret Service had been drilling holes in the walls to install listening devices and even mini-cameras. Unfortunately, their efforts have not yet produced results, as both the audio and video quality have been subpar, much like from the bug on the phone. The negotiators were oblivious to the fact that the SAS had enlisted an architect to create detailed models of each floor of the building, ensuring the military would know the precise locations for the upcoming operation. Furthermore, a 2/3 scale replica of the building was constructed at the SAS base, enabling personnel to rehearse the assault under conditions as realistic as possible. In summary, the negotiators were kept in the dark about most of the police's plans, and for good reason. The less they knew, the lower the risk of inadvertently disclosing critical information during conversations with the militants. The hostages, Harris, Locke, and Karkuti, recognize that Tafiq's patience may be wearing thin, which could result in bloodshed. They decide to engage with the leader of the militants. First, they persuade him that diplomacy in Britain invariably takes time and that impulsive decisions should be avoided, as they could lead to irreversible consequences. Second, they subtly suggest the possibility of surrendering, proposing that the authorities might quickly arrange for their exchange or release. To bolster their argument, they reference the failed airplane hijacking attempt by Palestinian militants in 1970, when a terrorist was exchanged merely a month after the incident. The leader of the militants retorts that surrender is not an option, as it would equate to capitulation. After sunset, individuals inside the Iranian embassy hear loud noises emanating from the street. Looking out the window, they observe gas company workers drilling into the roadway. Naturally, no scheduled work was planned in this area of London. Hearing the commotion from the workers, Officer Delu from Scotland Yard decides to divert those inside the embassy from the police's efforts to install listening devices within the walls of the building. That evening, Tafiq and journalist Karkuti engage in an extensive conversation about Middle Eastern history and politics, as the leader of the militants finds Karkuti to be an intriguing conversationalist. During their discussion, the terrorist discloses to the hostage the name of the true mastermind behind the attack on the Iranian embassy, Abu Nidal. He resided in Iraq, was under Saddam Hussein's protection, and participated in freelance terrorism globally. The U.S. Department of Defense regarded Nadal's group as the most dangerous terrorist organization in existence. Trevor Locke, along with several other hostages, awakens to the sound of loud snoring. The source of this noise is a man named Novobzada Gul, who can officially be regarded as the most unlikely hostage of all. Gul is a drifter who found himself in the building simply because he needed somewhere to sit and pass the time. For several days, he has been earnestly attempting to persuade the terrorists to let him go by claiming he has a plane ticket and could miss his flight. This argument fails to sway the militants, leaving Gul to continue disturbing everyone night after night with his boisterous snoring. Only on the fourth day of the hostage situation does the police succeed in obtaining photographs of the militants. Utilizing the testimony of released hostage Chris Kremer, composite sketches are created and sent to the British Embassy in Iran for comparison with photographs of visa applicants. Naturally, the names provided by the militants during their applications are found to be fraudulent, but now the police at least possess actual photographs for reference. This is a crucial component for the forthcoming assault, as SAS personnel will need to swiftly distinguish between hostages and terrorists under intensely challenging conditions. Officially, all hostages have equal rights to be freed. Unofficially, the SAS establishes clear priorities: who would be rescued first and who would be next. At the top of the list is Trevor Locke, a British citizen and law enforcement officer. Following him are all other British nationals in second place. Citizens of other countries are ranked third. Lastly, if any militants survive, they would be apprehended. A BBC correspondent approaches the embassy once more, having been brought there at the request of the terrorists. Their primary question is, why hasn't their statement been aired yet? Negotiations on behalf of the terrorists are being led by the captured BBC sound engineer, Sim Harris. He is literally shouting at his colleague from the window and expressing confusion about the delays, to which the colleague responds with something unintelligible, implying a misunderstanding. In reality, the BBC understood everything clearly. The authorities simply had no intention of broadcasting the terrorists' statement to the entire nation. However, recognizing that such a broadcast could facilitate the negotiation for the release of one of the hostages, the police reach out to the captors. They request the release of 2 individuals. After some deliberation, the terrorists agree. The militants and hostages gather around the radio receiver as the BBC host announces a break in the programming for an important announcement, and then reads the terrorists' statement verbatim. Tafiq, his accomplices, and even the hostages are satisfied. For them, it feels like a collective victory. Shortly before the 9 o'clock news, Tafiq, as promised, released one of the hostages. She was a young embassy secretary named Candy. After the leader of the militants listened to the broadcast, he agreed to release a second hostage. To the astonishment of many, this turned out to be Novobzada Gul, the rather random visitor to the embassy. One of the main factors influencing this decision was Gul's impossibly loud snoring, which irritated both the hostages and the visitors alike. Afterwards, Tafiq reaches out to the police and insists they provide food from the best Persian restaurant in London. That evening, a true feast takes place at the embassy. sound engineer Sim Harris records in his diary that he's going to bed feeling optimistic. He believes that tomorrow everything will conclude and they will return home safe and sound. Sadly, neither of these hopes will be realized. On Sunday morning, a cheerful atmosphere fills the embassy. Following yesterday's broadcast and a delightful dinner, many are waking up in good spirits. The terrorists even permit the hostages to wash for the first time in 5 days. Constable Locke senses that he has an unpleasant odor. Throughout these days, he has refrained from removing several layers of clothing for fear of exposing his revolver. It's hard to wash without undressing, so the officer respectfully declines the offer. Instead, Locke requests one of the militants to take him to the restroom. There, he claims to be experiencing severe intestinal issues and politely requests permission to close the door as an exception. His request is granted. Thus, on the 5th day after the takeover, what could be described as the most heroic bout of constipation in history comes to an end. The first half of Sunday proves to be uneventful. British authorities convene with ambassadors from several Middle Eastern nations whose presence the captors have demanded, and the representatives offer various options to resolve the situation, including providing the militants with a plane to leave the country. The British officials make it clear that this will not occur. In turn, the ambassadors prefer to distance themselves from the situation, merely passing messages back and forth. Furthermore, they fully recognize that the events unfolding in the embassy are part of a proxy war between Iran and Iraq, in which no one wishes to intervene. Consequently, communication with the diplomats from the Middle Eastern countries concludes without any tangible results. In the afternoon, the embassy building begins to resonate with the Chekhovian gun of national conflict. The militants scrawl various derogatory phrases on the walls aimed at the current leadership of Iran, including writings in Persian. Consequently, embassy staff come across the phrase, "Death to Khamenei." The Iranian ambassador Afris starts vocally confronting the militants. The most aggressive of the terrorists, named Yassim, shouts back and pushes Afris. Another militant brandishes a grenade as a threat. An Iranian embassy staff member and spy, Lavasani, joins the fray, screaming so loudly that his words become unintelligible. Journalist Karkuti and other hostages attempt to defuse the situation. The police can hear everything clearly. Their listening devices hidden within the walls are now producing results. Next, the hostages hear the militant leader Tafiq summoning journalist Karkuti to a separate office. At that moment, many believe Tafiq has taken him away to execute him. It's unclear why Karkuti was specifically chosen, as the two had developed a good rapport. Finally, to everyone's surprise, the terrorist leader decides to release Mustafa Karkuti. Immediately after his release, the police interrogate him. He provides a significant amount of crucial information about the situation inside the embassy. All of this data is meticulously analyzed by SAS personnel. They ultimately decide that the assault will occur within the building rather than on a bus or at the airport. Therefore, the hostages' detailed accounts of the militants' weaponry and their positions inside are critically important. At night, SAS personnel finalize the details of their plan. They decide that the assault will commence in the evening. a time when the militants will believe that the day is winding down and that no significant actions are likely to occur. In other words, they will be less alert. The entire operation is expected to take just a few minutes, and its success will hinge on thorough preparation, strict discipline, and notably, a bit of luck. The effects of sleep deprivation can be devastating to both body and mind. Symptoms include irritability, hallucinations, impaired decision-making, weakness, and mood swings. Intelligence agencies in numerous countries have long recognized sleep deprivation as an effective means of torture. Since the takeover began, the terrorist leader Tafiq has managed only 5 hours of sleep in total. All of this is taking place under conditions of extreme stress. By Monday, the impact of sleep deprivation becomes so significant that Tafiq finds it difficult to articulate even simple thoughts. The leader of the terrorists calls Trevor Locke and Sim Harris to the wall where the militants had inscribed an offensive message. Since then, it has become apparent that the wall is bulging inward. This is due to the fact that the embassy shares a boundary with the adjacent building. Tafiq believes that the police are fully gearing up for an assault, including plans to demolish the wall. In this regard, the terrorist leader is correct. The SAS had nearly dismantled the wall from the neighboring building, expecting it to be one of the potential entry points for the assault. However, they later scrapped this idea. At this moment, the final plan for Operation Nimrod has been approved, and SAS personnel are completing their last preparations for the assault. Approximately 30 individuals will take part in the operation. Nimrod will commence with an explosion, with charges positioned on the roof and the balcony of the second floor. The explosive power must be enough to thoroughly disorient those inside without completely demolishing the building. Following this, soldiers will deploy stun grenades, and the 30 operatives, divided into several teams, will storm the building from various directions. One group will enter from the inner courtyard, another through the second-floor balcony above the main entrance, while the remaining teams will access the building from the roof using fire escapes or ropes. SAS soldiers meticulously memorize the interior layout of the rooms, as well as photographs of both the militants and the hostages. They will need to make split-second decisions on whether to open fire on a person. This takes place under conditions of low visibility due to smoke grenades. The squad leader provides clear directives to his team, emphasizing that their main objective is to rescue the hostages. While the lives of the militants should be spared whenever feasible, if any SAS officer perceives even the slightest threat from a terrorist, he must engage immediately. Following yet another round of negotiations with the police, during which clear responses to the militants' demands remained elusive, the terrorists take the Arab press attaché and spy Saeed Lawasani into a separate room. There is no word from him for about 30 minutes. Then, the hostages hear several gunshots. Shortly thereafter, Tafiq emerges and announces that Lawasani has been killed. From this point on, this will occur every 40 minutes, with the terrorists killing one person at a time until their demands are met by the authorities. The police also hear the gunshots due to wiretapping. The SAS operation is not yet fully prepared, so they need to buy time while ensuring the remaining hostages remain unharmed. The Home Secretary drafts a letter to the militants, but the message contains only vague statements with no responses to the terrorists' demands. British national Ron Morris, a caretaker at the Iranian embassy who is among the hostages, informs police officer Locke that he believes the assault will commence today, suggesting it's wise not to take off their shoes just in case. At this moment, Trevor Locke is handling his revolver, contemplating whether it's time to use it. The police officers overseeing the wiretapping intercept a conversation between two militants speaking in Arabic. "We need to act before dawn," says the first. "We need to kill 2 or 3 hostages," replies the second. "No, by 10 a.m., we will kill them all," asserts the first. 10 minutes later, the commander of the SAS squad signals that they are fully ready and waiting for the order to commence Operation Nimrod. A thunderous explosion reverberates through the Iranian embassy building, marking the start of Operation Nimrod, which will unfold over the next few minutes. All of this is being broadcast live by television channels. Millions of viewers witness an event more remarkable than anything they have ever seen in their lives. First, one of the SAS teams descends from the roof using ropes to reach the second-floor balcony from the rear courtyard. One soldier becomes entangled in his rope and dangles over a window opening from which flames are erupting. Following the explosion, he calls to his teammates above to cut the rope. He then drops onto the balcony, and the team rushes inside. Several soldiers enter through the glass roof that had shattered moments earlier, while others force their way in through the rear entrance. Inside, thick, acrid smoke envelops everything. Tafiq is standing by the phone, with the police currently distracting him through negotiations. The leader of the militants slams down the phone and rushes into the corridor where he confronts Trevor Locke. For a few moments, the two men lock eyes, which is enough for the hostage's symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome to vanish completely. Locke forcefully shoves Tafiq into the doorway, causing him to fall to the floor and drop his gun. Locke then pins him down with his firm 100-kilogram frame, restraining his movements. The police officer feels the revolver tucked at his waist. For a week, the man on the floor has been threatening the hostages with murder, making it entirely justifiable for Locke to use his weapon. However, he chooses not to. He maintains his grip on Tafiq, keeping him pinned down on the floor. Gunshots and screams reverberate through the building. Many hostages scramble to hide beneath tables, chairs, or simply huddle in corners. Sim Harris leaps onto the balcony from a burning room. The television cameras can't capture the chaos unfolding inside. However, a few minutes later, viewers witness hostages being led out of the building, many of them lying on the ground. They are then escorted to ambulances. 10 minutes later, Operation Nimrod is officially announced as complete. The SAS managed to rescue all the hostages except for one, the medic from the Iranian embassy, who was killed by a terrorist during the assault. Several hostages and one SAS officer sustained minor injuries. The only surviving militant was Fauzi Nejat. After SAS personnel entered the room where Trevor Locke was holding the leader of the militants, he released his grip and exited the building with the other hostages. In that moment, Tafiq tried to reach for the gun and was shot by an SAS officer. The remaining terrorists were also neutralized as they actively resisted. As one soldier involved in Operation Nimrod later acknowledges, this outcome was a stroke of extraordinary luck. Any variation, such as starting the operation 5 seconds earlier or later, could have drastically worsened the situation. "Yes, we were lucky," the officer will later say, "but luck must be earned." The only surviving militant, Fauzi Najat, was sentenced to life in prison. After 27 years, he was granted parole and opted to live in Britain. Police officer Trevor Locke received an award for his bravery. He seldom gave interviews and, following the incident, transferred to the traffic police outside the city, where he spent his time observing passing cars until his retirement. In his spare time, Locke raised pigeons. Many of the hostages are still alive today or have passed away fairly recently. Each year, they gathered on the anniversary of the embassy takeover. This somewhat overlooked event significantly influenced not just the lives of those directly involved, but also the broader world. The Iran-Iraq War commenced in the same year, 1980, and the hostage-taking in London can to some extent be seen as a precursor to this conflict. The repercussions of the takeover resonate in numerous ongoing conflicts across the Middle East. For Margaret Thatcher, this incident was a defining moment that began to reveal the character of the future Iron Lady. It is hard to imagine how her responses during the notable Falklands War or other key events might have differed without the context of this successful hostage rescue operation, which was certainly viewed as a major triumph, including by Thatcher herself. In 1980, the hostage-taking in London sent shockwaves around the globe. For many Britons, it stands out as one of those pivotal moments. Where were you when it happened? Today, even within Britain, not everyone is aware of the events that unfolded on May 5, 1980, much less the rest of the world. Why has this event faded from memory for so many? There are likely several reasons for this, but perhaps the primary one, sadly, is that over the past 40 years, humanity has encountered far more horrifying events.